Penguin Random House Audio presents Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, The Road to Neverwinter, by Jaleigh Johnson, read for you by Fred Berman. To Tim, because ours is a DM and PC love story for the ages. Also, I'm sorry I almost disintegrated your character that one time, and I'm sorry I killed him later. In my defense, I never expected to roll that high. Anyway, love you tons. Prologue. Avert your gaze, foul beast! Edgin shielded his face with his hands. You have no power over me! But no power in Faerun could protect him from the eruption of giggles that followed his pronouncement. Edgin peeked between his fingers. Also a mistake. His daughter, Kira, lay on her bed, a cloud of dark brown curls spread over her pillow, grinning up at him with a light in her eyes that was 1 part adoration and 2 parts mischief. The cutest basilisk. No man alive could be expected to resist the power of that look. Please, Dad. Kira sat up, tugging on his hand to bring him closer to the rickety wooden chair sitting beside the bed. Just one story. Edgin let out a dramatic sigh and sank down onto the chair. All right, 1 story, and then you'll go to sleep within 10 seconds, right? Right. It was never 10 seconds. But Kira was already flopping back down, pulling her checkered quilt up to her chin. A fire burned in the small hearth on the other side of the room, casting everything in warm golden light. Flickering shadows danced on the walls. It was, Edgin had to admit, the perfect atmosphere and the perfect night for a story. Rain clicked softly on the window panes of the small cottage, and a faint rumble of thunder promised a storm sometime in the night, but it was still far off, a distant dragon growling in its sleep. The perfect atmosphere and a rapt audience. Truth was, he lived for nights like this. It hadn't always been this way, and he tried never to take what he had now for granted. All right then, which story is it going to be? He listed them off on his fingers. The harrowing heist of Harkindon, Longsaddle's bungled burglary, the case of the missing Cabochons. Missing because we stole them, Kira said helpfully. Hush you. Edgin put a finger to his lips. Dealer's choice then. What's it going to be? Kira stared up at the beamed ceiling, pretending to think it over. But Edgin knew his daughter. She'd already picked her tale. I want our story, she said. The story of our crew. Because of course she did. It was the longest, most tangled story of them all. But it was also Kira's favorite, and those eyes had him pinned to his chair with their hopeful delight. He was doomed. An origin story it is. He leaned forward in his chair, elbows propped on his knees, and cleared his throat. Then he hesitated, glancing at his daughter, the way her cheek pressed into the pillow as she turned toward him. You know this one starts off sad, he warned her. Are you all right with that? Kira looked thoughtful, and her gaze flicked to the wall above her bed, where a small domino mask with a hairline crack on one side hung in pride of place. A smile spread across her face as she turned back to Edgin. It's all right, she said. There are sad parts, but there are amazing parts too. Just like any good story. Edgin nodded, reaching out to squeeze his daughter's hand. In the land of Faerun, there is a wild, dangerous, and beautiful place called the Sword Coast, he began, letting his gaze go unfocused as he pictured the lands he'd walked, skulked, and bled through for most of his career as a Harper agent. Another time, another life. A version of himself that no longer existed. But the memories were as vivid in his mind's eye as staring into a clear pool of water. Throughout this stretch of the world, there are glittering cities where the wealthy, powerful, and magical hold sway. But there are also vast forests, jagged cliffs carved by time and tide, and humble villages nestled in between. In one of these remote villages, there lived a brave, handsome, capable man named... Edgin thought he heard a snort from the next room. Ah, so his audience was bigger than he'd thought. Well, he didn't mind performing for a crowd of 2. He could handle it. Chapter 1. 10 years ago. Edgin tried to remember the last time he'd slept. Sleep. That capricious, lovely siren. He knew he'd been acquainted with her once. He'd even had a bed. A comfortable bed, if he remembered correctly. Lately, though, his world had shrunk to the small, scarred kitchen table by the fire, and everything, from the dried herb bundles hanging from the ceiling to the pot of something cooking or burning in a pot on the stove, was just a little hazy around the edges. And it was all because of... A screech shattered the air in the small cottage, traveling right down Edgin's ear canal and rattling his heart inside his chest. He jumped, jostling the small bundle in his arms, and causing it to let out another ear-piercing shriek that he swore was worse than a banshee's wail. And he should know. He'd been up close and personal with one, a long time ago. This was no banshee. He looked down at his baby daughter. Kira's small face was scrunched up in an expression of misery that Edgin felt, if he was being honest, had no place on a newborn baby, whose only concerns in life were eating, sleeping, and defecating in alarmingly large quantities. Whereas Edgin's concerns were many and varied. He no longer had a job, for one. He'd left the Harpers, the do-gooder group to which he'd sworn an oath and dedicated his life, because that blind devotion had resulted in his wife's death at the hands of the Harpers' enemies. The grief and guilt of that had opened up a hole inside of Edgin, a hole that probably would have swallowed him, or he would have jumped in willingly, were it not for the squirming child in his arms. Kira, the only family he had left. He would die for her. He would walk through fire, face down a horde of kobolds, kill anyone who tried to harm her. He also occasionally wished he could toss her out a window to get some peace and quiet and sleep, which was a strange thought to have alongside the fierce love and protectiveness swirling in his chest. Was this what being a parent was supposed to be like? There was no one around to ask. So Edgin had just been muddling through these last few months. He poured himself his 15th or 16th cup of tea from the dented kettle in the center of the table, trying to keep himself alert while Kira continued to wail in infant misery. "I'm sorry, sweetie," he crooned, rocking her in his arms. "I don't know what you want." Getting his daughter to stop crying was just one of the things he'd been failing at. Another was the fact that they were out of firewood, and their pantry, already meagerly stocked to begin with, was now almost completely empty. Whatever he'd been cooking over the fire was giving off a distinctive burnt stench that filled the cottage and made his eyes water. But he didn't want to put Kira down long enough to deal with that. And when was he supposed to go out and get supplies while she was crying, and with what money would he buy them since he no longer had a place among the Harpers? Edgin shook himself out of that downward spiral and took a big swig of tea with his free hand. He grimaced. It was hot, and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?